Welcome to Kiss and Chapters, where every story begins with a spark and ends with a swoon. If you love heart-fluttering romances, unexpected twists, and characters you'll root for, you're in the right place. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so I can keep bringing you more sweet, emotional, and unforgettable stories. Let's fall in love with every chapter, together. Chapter 1. The Forest Where Time Slips. The world was too green. Cristian stood barefoot on moss, his trousers soaked up to the knee, and his mind spinning with one repeated thought. Where, and when, am I now? Birdsong filled the air, layered over the rush of a nearby brook. The forest was untouched. No buzzing wires, no passing planes overhead. The trees towered like ancient watchmen, leaves filtering the afternoon light into shards of gold. It was breathtaking, yes, but utterly disorienting. He glanced at his watch. Broken as always. Time never cooperated with him. Cristian sighed and stepped forward, following the faintest trace of a dirt path. It always started this way. One minute he was in his flat, typing, reading, dozing off, and the next he was somewhere else. Not just another place. Another time. He'd long given up fighting the jumps. They were random, uncontrollable, and cruel. Sometimes he was thrown into decades past. Other times, into futures that felt eerie in their strangeness. Most jumps lasted hours. A few lasted days. But all of them carried one common thread. Her. He turned a bend in the path and stopped cold. There she was. A woman sat on a smooth rock at the edge of the brook, sketchbook open in her lap. A pale blue dress pooled around her ankles. Her dark curls were twisted up with a ribbon, and the sun painted her profile in soft light. She was sketching a tree, no, not just the tree. She was sketching him hidden behind branches. His breath caught. He hadn't realized he was in her view. She looked up. Their eyes met. "Hello," she said, tilting her head. "Did you get lost?" Her voice. It jolted something inside him. Not recognition exactly, but a pull. A memory that hadn't yet been made. He stepped forward slowly. I'm not sure," Cristian murmured. "Maybe I was meant to find this place." Or you, he thought, but didn't dare say. The woman smiled softly and closed her sketchbook. "Well, it's not often someone else wanders down this way. People say the woods are haunted." Her smile widened playfully. "By travelers from another time." Cristian's heart stopped. "Do they?" he asked, voice strained. He shrugged. "It's just a story. The older women in town say that now and then a strange man appears here. Always alone. Always lost. My grandmother used to say she met one once when she was a girl." His mouth had gone dry. "And did she?" "She claimed he vanished right before her eyes." She paused. "Like a dream. Or a ghost." Cristian couldn't breathe. She stood, brushing off her skirt. "I don't suppose you're that man?" He gave a broken laugh. "I might be." The woman stepped closer. "I'm Felize." The name cracked something inside him. Not just familiar. Important. Like a thread sewn into every version of his life. "I'm Cristian," he whispered. "And I think I've met you before." She studied him, expression unreadable. Then she nodded slowly, like she'd heard something inevitable. "You look like someone I've dreamed about." For a second, time didn't feel so cruel. They sat together by the brook. She asked where he was from and he fumbled through vague answers. She told him about her quiet town nearby, about her love for drawing trees and listening to birds, and how she came here to be alone with her thoughts. Felize wasn't shocked by his oddness. If anything, she welcomed it, like a puzzle she instinctively wanted to solve. As the sun dipped lower, casting golden fire through the trees, Cristian felt it. The pull. The crackle in the air. The way his hands began to tingle like atoms dissolving. Oh, not yet. Not now. He reached for her hand. She startled slightly but didn't pull away. "Felize," he said quickly, urgently. "If you ever dream of me again, remember this place. The tree, the stream. You may not know why, but one day you'll find me again. And I'll find you." She blinked, confusion rushing in. "Cristian, what are you?" But the light warped. His body felt weightless. He was falling through time again. And her voice chased after him, like a thread of sound stretching across centuries. "Find me again." Chapter 2. The Woman in the Photograph. Cristian didn't scream anymore when he jumped. That part of the terror had long dulled. He blinked awake on cold concrete, the sharp scent of motor oil and exhaust filling his lungs. Neon signs buzzed above his head, casting flickering red and green over slick pavement. A city. Nighttime. The air felt modern, familiar, fast. Cristian sat up slowly. His watch, still useless, had stopped at 6:47 p.m. He stood, ignoring the throb in his knee, and scanned the alley. Nothing looked out of place, and no one seemed to notice that a man had just reappeared from thin air. He emerged into the street, trying to ground himself. Horns honked in the distance. A street vendor grilled skewers nearby. The air buzzed with life. He recognized the language on a nearby billboard. English. Somewhere in the late 1980s, maybe early 90s, judging by the fashion and signage. It didn't matter. What mattered was finding her again. Every time he jumped, he found her. Or rather, she found him, in one way or another. Felize was the only anchor he had in this chaotic maze of timelines. She was the one face that never blurred. Cristian wandered until he spotted it. An antique shop tucked into a corner of an old brick building, its window fogged slightly from the warmth inside. Something drew him to it, a pulse of instinct more than logic. The bell above the door jingled as he entered. It smelled of old wood and stories. Musty books, aged fabric, tarnished silver. A woman behind the counter looked up but said nothing as Cristian walked slowly through the rows. Then he saw it. A black and white photograph sat in a weathered frame atop a glass shelf. It was a woman standing beneath a tree, one hand resting gently on its trunk. Her face was turned slightly to the side, her expression serene. Her eyes held that same spark of mischief and curiosity that had haunted him since the forest. Felize. His hand trembled as he picked up the frame. A label beneath it read, Felize Wynne 1942. Local artist and rumored mystic. Cristian's heart thudded. He traced the shape of her name with his thumb. 1942. That was backward from the last jump. He'd met her in what looked like the 1910s or 20s. Now here she was in a decade, 2 decades ahead. How? Or rather, how many versions of her were there? The shopkeeper approached quietly. She was something, wasn't she? Cristian looked up sharply. She was well known around here, the woman said, smiling fondly. People say she had dreams of future things. Painted cities she'd never seen. Described machines no one had invented yet. And she always spoke of a man she saw in her dreams. A traveler. A ghost with sad eyes. Cristian gripped the photo frame tighter. What else do you know about her? She disappeared during the war. No one knows how or where. Some say she ran off with a lover. Others say she just vanished. The woman shrugged. Mystery suits her, don't you think? Cristian nodded faintly. May I buy this? The shopkeeper smiled. Sure. Nobody else ever asked. Cristian left the shop with the photograph pressed to his chest, like a fragile piece of truth. He checked the back. No address, no clues, just her name and the year. As he walked aimlessly through the street, her eyes in the photograph seemed to follow him, steady and patient. And then something odd happened. He stopped at a cafe window and glanced inside, and there she was. Not the same Felize from the forest. Her hair was longer, her clothes different, but the way she stirred her tea with absent-minded grace. It was her. Cristian pressed his hand to the glass. Was this the same timeline? A crossover? Or just a coincidence? He stepped inside. The bell chimed and she looked up. Their eyes met. She didn't smile this time. Instead, Felize stared at him like she'd been waiting years. You're late, she said quietly. Cristian blinked. She gestured to the seat across from her. I've had this dream before. You walk in from the rain. You say nothing for a long time. Then you ask me if I remember the trees. Cristian's throat tightened. I do, she said softly before he could speak. I remember you, Cristian. You disappear every time. But I remember. She reached into her satchel and pulled out a worn leather journal. She flipped through pages of sketches. Of him. His eyes. His coat. His smile. His vanishing silhouette. I don't know why or how, she whispered, but I always find you. Even if I don't remember at first. I do eventually. Cristian reached across the table and took her hand. Warm. Steady. Felize, he whispered. I think we've been doing this for lifetimes. She nodded. Then maybe this time, she said, her eyes glinting, we'll find a way to stay. Chapter 3. Letters in the Ashes. Cristian landed hard this time. His shoulder slammed into cobblestone, and the world around him screamed with sirens. His ears rang. The sky above was thick with smoke. Fires burned in the distance. Buildings, some crumbled, some barely standing, lined a narrow street. Soldiers ran past him. People shouted in clipped British accents. It was a war zone. Cristian coughed and dragged himself behind an overturned cart. His fingers dug into the dirt. Where am I now? The last thing he remembered was Felize's hand in his, her voice saying, maybe this time we'll stay. And now this. Bombs and rubble and chaos. A hand gripped his arm. Sir, are you hurt? Cristian looked up, and there she was again. Felize. But not the gentle painter in the forest. Not the wistful dreamer from the cafe. This version of Felize wore a stained nurse's uniform, her dark hair tied back in a scarf. Her cheeks were smudged with soot, her eyes wide with urgency. She didn't know him this time, not yet. Cristian's voice caught. I'm fine. You're lucky you weren't closer to the blast, she said briskly, helping him up. The hospital's overwhelmed. If you can walk, follow me. Otherwise, I'll have to leave you. He followed. They moved quickly through shattered streets to a makeshift triage station. Cristian kept glancing at her. This version of Felize who didn't flinch in the face of pain or death. Her voice was calm as she directed others. Her hands didn't tremble even as she stitched up wounds. And yet, something in her hesitated every time their eyes met. That night, as the bombing stopped and fires dimmed, Cristian sat near a broken window in the church-turned-hospital. Felize approached quietly, her boots crunching over glass. You're not a soldier, she said softly, sitting beside him. No, Cristian murmured. Not really anything these days. She tilted her head. But your accent, it's not local. And your clothes, your watch. It's broken, but it doesn't look like it came from around here. He met her eyes. What if I told you? I'm not supposed to be here? That I came from another time. That I've seen you before. Many times. In different lives. She didn't laugh. Didn't roll her eyes. She simply studied him for a long moment. Then she whispered, I believe you. Cristian's breath hitched. Felize reached into her satchel and pulled out a small journal. She flipped to a page filled with sketches. Of him. His eyes, his hands, even the coat he no longer wore. She held the journal out. I've been drawing you for years, she said. Before I ever saw your face. Cristian touched the page like it might burn him. You remember. Not clearly, she said. More like echoes. I see you in dreams. Always out of reach. He exhaled shakily. Every time I jump, you're there. Sometimes you know me. Sometimes you don't. But you're always, you. Felize smiled sadly. And then you disappear again. Cristian looked away. Yes. They sat in silence for a long time, the ruined world outside cradling them in quiet. Then Felize said, Will you disappear soon? I don't know, Cristian answered honestly. Sometimes I get days. Sometimes just minutes. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a pen. Then write something for me. Anything. So I'll know it was real. He hesitated, then took the pen and opened the back of her journal. If I disappear, don't wait. Just know I loved you in every version of this life. Cristian. When he handed it back, their fingers touched and the crackle started. Oh. Not again. Cristian surged forward, pressing a desperate kiss to her lips. She froze, then kissed him back fiercely like she already knew this was goodbye. The moment shattered. Time yanked him away again. Her voice echoed through the static. Find me again. And the world went dark. Chapter 4. The Girl in the Garden. Cristian woke to the sound of wind chimes. He was lying in soft grass, the sun warm on his face. A breeze rustled through nearby trees, and the air smelled of jasmine and warm soil. For a moment he didn't move. This time, felt different. Calmer. Softer. Until he sat up and realized how young the world looked. The houses in the distance had fresh paint. The fence near him looked newly built. A single bicycle lay tipped over beside a tree, its bell glittering in the sunlight. Then he heard her voice, small, curious and high-pitched. Who are you? Cristian turned slowly. A girl, no more than 8 years old, stood a few feet away holding a red crayon in one hand and a coloring book in the other. Her dark curls were messy, her knees smudged with dirt, and a butterfly clip sparkled in her hair. His chest ached. Even as a child, he knew it was her. Felize. He swallowed. He got lost. She squinted at him, then frowned. Are you from the war? Cristian blinked. What? My grandpa says sometimes the soldiers come back. But they're confused. You look confused. I guess I am, he said gently. But I'm not a soldier. Felize tilted her head. You talk funny. He smiled faintly. So do you. She sat cross-legged across from him, completely unafraid. Why are you in my backyard? Cristian glanced around. I didn't mean to be. I didn't even know it was yours. She pointed to a tree nearby. That's my wishing tree. I talk to it when I want something really badly. He looked at the tree, tall and gnarled, branches like arms stretching upward. Familiar. In another time he'd sat beneath that very tree with an older Felize. Had kissed her. Had promised to find her again. And what do you wish for? He asked. He shrugged. I dunno. Sometimes I ask it to bring me a puppy. Sometimes I ask it to let me fly. She paused. Lately I've been asking it about the man in my dreams. Cristian's heart stilled. What kind of man? He asked carefully. She looked down at her crayon. He's tall. But kind. He never talks much. He just looks at me like he knows me. Cristian's throat tightened. Do you think you've met him before? She nodded. He shows up in lots of dreams. And then he disappears. He stared at her, this tiny, innocent version of the woman he loved, and felt utterly helpless. She was too young to know, too far from the memories that would one day awaken. And yet, even now, something in her remembered. He glanced up at the sun. It was already lowering. Time was running out again. Felize, he said softly. If you ever dream about that man again, tell him something for me. She blinked. What? Cristian leaned forward. Tell him you'll wait. That you'll find him again. She gave him a skeptical look. That's silly. Maybe. But just in case. Felize nodded solemnly. Okay. He stood, unsure what else to do. But as he turned to leave, she called out, Wait. He turned. She held out the crayon. It's red. It's for remembering. Cristian took it slowly, holding the tiny wax stick like it was sacred. I won't forget you, she said more softly now. Even if I'm supposed to. A moment later the wind shifted. The colors around him blurred. The earth tilted. His fingertips buzzed. The jump was beginning. Cristian pressed the crayon to his heart. She waved as the world tore away. Chapter 5. The Version Who Remembered. Cristian landed with a soft thud onto wooden floorboards. This time there was no chaos. No bombs. No war. Just silence. He blinked, adjusting to dim light. He was in a room, a small one lined with bookshelves, dusty sunlight filtering through lace curtains. A fireplace crackled in the corner. Everything smelled like parchment and lavender. Then he heard a whisper. I knew you'd come. Cristian turned slowly. Felize stood at the far end of the room, dressed in a loose white blouse and worn jeans, barefoot, holding a sketchbook. Her expression wasn't surprised. It wasn't even confused. It was relieved. She stepped closer, her voice steady. Cristian. He stared. You remember? I remember everything, she said softly. The garden. The forest. The war hospital. The girl with the red crayon. She smiled faintly. You kissed me before you vanished. I was 19 then. I'm 28 now. Cristian's heart hammered. 9 years. I've been waiting, she whispered. And writing. Dreaming. Sketching. Trying to understand. She held out her sketchbook. Cristian opened it with shaking hands. Page after page was filled with him. His eyes, hands, gestures. Words in the margins. Snippets of phrases he'd once said. A red crayon taped inside the back cover. His knees buckled slightly as he sat on the edge of a couch. Felize moved beside him, calm and sure. After that kiss I knew. Something shifted in me. It was like all the dreams and fragments I'd collected for years finally fell into place. Cristian closed his eyes. I don't understand. Why this version of you? Why now? Maybe we're aligning, she said gently. Maybe the universe is finally growing tired of watching us miss each other. He looked at her, really looked at her. She was radiant in a quiet, enduring way. As if every version of her had finally bloomed into one. I don't want to disappear again, he whispered. I can feel it, Felize. The pull. It's coming. She reached forward and took his hand. Then stay as long as you can. That night they stayed in the room, curled up beside each other on the floor, surrounded by pages and candlelight. Cristian told her everything he could remember. The timelines, the jumps, the fading years. She listened without blinking, as if memorizing each word. She showed him the journals she'd kept. The entries that began with, I dreamed of him again, and ended with, he's getting closer. When he touched her face, she didn't flinch. She leaned into it like someone touching a long-lost photograph. And then, as dawn cracked through the window, Cristian felt it. The air shimmered. His skin buzzed. He closed his eyes, holding her tightly. I'm sorry, he said. I would stay forever if I could. Felize pressed something into his hand. You already do, she whispered. Light swallowed him. When he opened his palm, he found a pressed forget-me-not. Chapter 6. The Last Jump. Pain was the first thing Cristian felt. A heavy, dull ache pressed against the back of his skull, then spread behind his eyes like thunderclouds. He groaned and opened his eyes slowly. White ceiling. Beeping monitors. The sterile scent of disinfectant. A hospital. He blinked again. Was this another jump? Another moment borrowed from someone else's life? Footsteps. A soft voice. He's awake. A nurse leaned over him with a gentle smile. Mr. Suarez? Can you hear me? Cristian's throat was dry. He nodded slowly. You've been unconscious for 3 days, she said. You collapsed in the middle of a bookstore. Your ID says your name is Cristian Suarez. Does that sound familiar? He blinked. Cristian Suarez. That's me. A name he hadn't heard in so long it felt like a dream. Like someone he used to be before the jumps began. Bookstore? That wasn't right. Or maybe it was. Cristian tried to sit up, but his body resisted. The nurse gently urged him back down. It's okay. You're stable now. No major injuries. Just exhaustion and some dehydration. She paused. Do you have someone we can call? Family? A friend? Cristian's mind spun. There was only one person he wanted to see. Felize, he croaked. Is there someone named Felize? The nurse frowned. I'm not sure, sir. No one's visited yet. But if you give us her full name. He closed his eyes. It was useless. In every timeline she was always just out of reach. Until she wasn't. 2 days later he was discharged with nothing but the clothes on his back and a folder of hospital forms. He wandered the streets, lost, still half afraid that time would tug him back again. But it didn't. Hours passed. Then a day. Then 3. And for the first time in years, Cristian stayed in one place. The world felt fixed, like he'd finally stepped into a timeline that didn't crack beneath his feet. Was this what he had been chasing all this time? He sat on a bench in a park, staring at families playing nearby, birds fluttering overhead, people just living. He felt like an intruder. Like someone born out of time who had finally landed in the right one, but didn't know what to do next. Then he saw it. Across the street, in a quiet little shop with white shutters and ivy hanging from the windows, a small wooden sign read, Forget-me-not bookstore and tea. His heart clenched. He rose without thinking and crossed the street, hands trembling. The bell above the door jingled as he stepped inside. It was warm. Cozy. Rows of books lined the walls and tea kettles simmered behind the counter. Everything smelled like chamomile and lemon. Then he saw her. Behind the counter, arranging a stack of notebooks, stood a woman with dark curls tucked loosely behind her ears. She was older now, maybe late 20s, maybe early 30s, but her eyes were the same. Felize. Cristian froze. She looked up as if sensing something and her smile faded. Their eyes met. And for a second, just 1 second, everything was still. Felize walked slowly around the counter, her lips parting. It's you, she said softly. You're real. Cristian could barely breathe. This is my last jump. I think I'm finally here. She reached for him without hesitation, as though she had waited forever for this moment. I've been dreaming of this bookstore for years, she whispered. I opened it last year. I thought maybe if I stayed in one place long enough, you'd find me. He laughed through a choked breath. I didn't find you. You built a lighthouse and waited. She pulled him into her arms. And the world didn't disappear. It stayed. Chapter 7. Déjà vu. The bell above the door chimed softly. Cristian stepped into the forget-me-not bookstore and tea every morning at 9. Not a second earlier, not a second later. He always ordered the same thing. Peppermint tea with a spoonful of honey. He always sat at the corner table by the window. Felize never asked why. She just smiled, poured his tea and joined him when she could. This had become their quiet rhythm. A routine that, for the first time in Cristian's fractured existence, stayed the same. A month had passed since he'd arrived in this timeline. He still didn't quite know how. There was no flash of light, no sudden jolt, just a soft ending to a long journey. And he had chosen every day since to stay close to Felize. They hadn't rushed. There was no urgency now. No stolen kisses in crumbling cities, no frantic promises before the next jump. There was just peace. And Cristian didn't know what to do with peace. "You're quiet today," Felize said, sliding into the seat across from him. Her curls were pinned loosely at her nape and a smudge of ink dotted her thumb. "I'm always quiet," Cristian replied, but his eyes crinkled. "Yes, but today it's a different kind of quiet." She tilted her head. "You're thinking too hard." "I'm trying not to." "Liar." He smiled into his teacup. Felize reached into her tote bag and pulled out a small hand-bound journal. "I made this for you." He blinked. "A journal? You always say your memories blur together." "I thought writing them down might help." Cristian touched the cover. "I've never been able to write them. Every time I tried, I'd jump before I finished a sentence." She leaned in, her voice soft. "You won't jump now." He looked at her, heart heavy and full all at once. "How can you be so sure?" Felize reached across the table and pressed her hand over his. "Because you've already stayed longer than ever before. And I know the look in your eyes when you're about to vanish. You don't have it anymore." Cristian flipped open the first page. Blank waiting. Hopeful. That afternoon he began to write. He wrote about the forest where he first saw her sketching beneath sunlight. About the hospital in the war where she kissed him with trembling fingers. About the little girl who gave him a red crayon and said she wouldn't forget him. About the cafe dreamer who waited 9 years and remembered everything. Felize read every entry page by page and filled the margins with her own recollections. Sketches, colors, bits of poetry. Their stories slowly wove together. One evening, Cristian walked Felize home. It had rained earlier and the air smelled clean and electric. They strolled beneath street lamps, side by side, hands brushing. "Do you ever wonder," Cristian asked, "why us?" She looked up at him. "What do you mean?" "Why time chose us. Why we kept meeting. Why I jumped. Why you always remembered. Why now?" Felize smiled, her hand slipping into his. "Because some souls refuse to be separated. Even by time." They stopped beneath a tree whose blossoms were just beginning to bloom. Cristian turned to her slowly. "In every timeline I've wanted to stay. But something always pulled me away. And now." He stepped closer, their foreheads nearly touching. "Now I think I've finally arrived where I was meant to be." Felize whispered, "Then stay." And he did. He stayed. He leaned in and kissed her, not with urgency or fear but with something quiet and steady. The kind of kiss that said, "This is ours now." Above them, the tree swayed gently, petals drifting to the ground like falling stars. Cristian didn't feel any pull. No dizziness. No hum in his fingertips. Time for once stood still for them. Chapter 8. Walking through memory. Felize stood in front of the old oak tree, her hand resting against its rough bark. The same tree she once called her wishing tree. The same one she had drawn again and again without ever knowing why. Now she remembered. Cristian watched her from a few steps away, his breath caught in his throat. "This is it," she said softly. "I was 8. You were a stranger in the garden. I gave you a crayon." She turned to him, eyes misty. "You told me to wait." "I remember," Cristian murmured. "You were fearless. Even then." They were traveling now, not far, just quietly retracing the places where time had once thrown them apart. The garden was their first stop. The forest came next. The sunlight that streamed through the trees hadn't changed. Felize stood in the exact spot she once sketched him from, flipping open her notebook and pointing at the drawing. "I drew this here before I even knew who you were." Never made sense. Now it does. Cristian gently took her hand. I think our hearts remembered even when our minds didn't. They visited the ruins of an old hospital next, now just a stone foundation wrapped in ivy and moss. Felize stood in the silence of it, staring at a crumbled wall. There was blood, she said, and pain. But I wasn't afraid. You kissed me. Then you vanished. Cristian moved beside her. I didn't want to go. I never wanted to go. She turned to him and smiled. But you always came back. They drove to the city next, to an old antique shop still tucked between modern buildings. The owner had changed, but the photograph still sat in the same place. Felize stared at the image of herself from 1942. That's me, she whispered. But it doesn't feel like me. More like a version I've only ever dreamed about. Cristian didn't speak. He just gently touched the edge of the frame. He had bought that photograph decades ago, or maybe weeks ago depending on time's strange logic. And now they stood in front of it again together. Felt like closing a loop. Back at the bookstore, Felize unlocked the attic and pulled down a box she hadn't touched in years. Inside were old sketches, old letters, and notebooks filled with fragmented thoughts. Entries that once made no sense. Now they were pieces of a map. I used to think I was going crazy, she whispered, laying out the pages. Dreams of bombs and forests. A man I loved but never met. I thought I was inventing you. Cristian took her hand. You were remembering me. She looked at him with a kind of wonder that never faded. How is it possible to love someone before you've lived with them? He smiled. As we have lived together. Again and again. Felize pressed her forehead to his. And now we finally get to live forward. That night, as they closed the shop and brewed a pot of tea, she curled into his side on the couch and whispered, I still see flashes sometimes. Little moments I forgot. A blue ribbon. A teacup you gave me. A scarf in a snowstorm. He wrapped his arms around her. Then let's make new memories. Enough that we won't need dreams to remember. She nodded against his chest. I like this version of us. Cristian smiled into her hair. So do I. Chapter 9, The Life We Choose. The calendar on the wall had 27 red check marks. Cristian made one each morning after he opened the shop. 27 days. He had never stayed in one timeline that long before. Not without feeling the pull in his bones, not without the ache of fading. But now. Time didn't pull. It settled. Felize came down the stairs humming. Her hair was still damp from her shower, and she wore one of Cristian's oversized shirts like it belonged to her. Which it did now. She crossed the bookstore to where he stood behind the counter and kissed his cheek. Morning, time traveler, she said with a sleepy smile. Cristian marked the 28th day. You know, he said, turning toward her, if I make it to 30, I'm buying you a houseplant. She laughed. 30 days and I get a fern? You spoil me. He smiled, but his chest swelled with something tender and overwhelming. Not because of the joke, but because this was their life now. Mornings. Coffee. Little promises. No jumps. No chases through time. Just love. Steady and present. That afternoon they hosted a poetry reading in the shop. Local readers filled the mismatched chairs. Felize made tea in tiny pots. Cristian sat near the back, smiling as she read one of her own poems aloud. A soft, haunting verse about a man she'd only seen in dreams. She caught his eye as she read the last line. And now I know he was always coming home to me. Cristian swallowed hard. He was home. Finally. In a timeline that let him breathe. After the event, an elderly woman approached them. That poem, she said to Felize, was beautiful. Sounds like something from another life. Felize smiled. It is. Cristian reached for her hand beneath the table and laced his fingers through hers. Later that night, they sat on the back steps of the shop, watching stars peek through the city haze. Cristian leaned back against the wall. Felize curled into his side with a mug of cocoa. I've been thinking, she said. Dangerous. She elbowed him gently. I've been thinking we should plant something. In the garden. He looked down at her. The one behind the shop? She nodded. It's a mess right now, but maybe something like lavender. Or jasmine. Something that lasts? He asked softly. Exactly. He kissed her temple. Then let's do it. That weekend they cleaned out the garden. Pulled weeds. Cleared rocks. Cristian found old bricks buried in the dirt and built a rough path. Felize planted tiny seedlings in neat rows, humming to them as if that might help them grow. By evening, their hands were dirty, their backs aching, and their hearts full. Cristian looked at the garden bed and said, "What if this is our timeline now? What if this one sticks?" Felize leaned against his shoulder. "Then let's make it beautiful." He pulled something from his pocket, a thin chain with a tiny pressed flower encased in glass. "Forget-me-not. I've had this since the jump," he said. "The day you gave it to me. I thought I'd lose it. But I didn't." Felize smiled and fastened the chain around her neck. "You didn't lose me either." Cristian wrapped his arms around her. The sun was setting, the air smelled like soil and promise, and for the first time in any lifetime, tomorrow felt real. Chapter 10. The One Timeline We Keep. The bookstore was closed for the day. Sunlight filtered in through the windows, catching dust motes in the air. A bouquet of lavender sat in a mason jar on the counter. The bell above the door was quiet, resting. Cristian stood at the center of the room in a navy blue suit, shoes polished, hair slightly messy as always. His hands trembled, but not because of a time jump. Because he was waiting for her. Felize. The woman he had found in dreams. In wars. In forests. In gardens. Across decades and lifetimes. Always waiting. Always calling him back. And now she was walking down the aisle between the bookstore shelves. Her dress was simple, soft ivory, sleeveless with a ribbon tied at the back. Her curls were pinned half up, a single forget-me-not tucked behind her ear. She didn't carry a bouquet. He didn't need to. Cristian's breath caught as she reached him. "You came," he whispered, because even now it still felt like a miracle. Felize smiled. "I always do." They exchanged vows beneath the old oak tree in the garden. Just a handful of friends, a string of fairy lights, and the sky as their witness. Cristian slid a silver band onto her finger. No more vanishing. No more timelines. Just this one. Just you. Felize placed a matching ring on his. "And if time tries to take you again, I'll fight it," he said. "I'll find my way back. I always do." They kissed. Not a desperate, stolen kiss. Not a goodbye kiss. But one filled with warmth, steady and sure. This was not fate's doing. This was their choice. Later, after the cake and music and laughter faded into quiet, they curled up in bed, tangled in sheets and soft lamplight. Felize rested her head on Cristian's chest, fingers tracing slow circles across his heart. "Do you ever miss it?" she asked softly. "The jumps. The mystery." Cristian thought for a long moment. "I used to think time was punishing me," he said. "That I was meant to be alone. To chase something I could never have. But then I realized, time wasn't cruel. It was leading me to you. Over and over. Until I got it right." Felize looked up at him, eyes shining. "And now." "Now," he whispered, "I have you. I remember everything. And I don't want to leave. Ever." She kissed his chest and sighed contentedly. "Then let's grow old together." "We already have," he teased. They both laughed. And in the soft stillness after, Cristian glanced at the red crayon that still sat on their nightstand, worn, faded, but whole. He kissed her forehead. Time didn't pull. It wrapped around them gently, finally choosing to stay. Just like they did. Bonus chapter. The Child Who Dreamed in Echoes. It was a rainy afternoon when Felize found her daughter sitting under the oak tree in the garden, a sketchpad balanced on her tiny knees. She was only 6, but already quiet like her father, with dark curls like her mother and a fierce, thoughtful gaze that sometimes felt far too ancient for her age. "What are you drawing, Alma?" Felize asked gently, holding a mug of warm milk in each hand. Alma didn't look up. Her crayon moved with purpose. A red one, always a red one. "The man from my dreams." Felize froze. She lowered herself beside her daughter on the bench and peered at the sketch. It was a tall man in a long coat standing at the edge of a forest. His eyes were kind but sad. Around him, the trees glowed with golden light. Behind him, a little girl watched from the shadows. Felize's heart skipped. "Where did you see him, sweetheart?" Alma finally looked up, thoughtful. "I don't know. He's just always there. Sometimes he gives me things. Sometimes he says he's sorry. But he always disappears before I can ask his name." Felize brushed a strand of hair behind Alma's ear. "Do you think he's real?" Alma nodded. "He feels real." She pointed to the forget-me-not flower pressed into the sketch's corner. He gave me that. Felize felt a wave of emotion crest quietly within her. She pulled Alma close, kissing the top of her head. You're very special, she whispered. You come from a long line of dreamers. From the doorway, Cristian watched them, hands in his pockets, his smile soft. He had known the moment Alma first woke crying from a dream she couldn't explain. That time had not forgotten them. It had merely moved forward. Later that night, after Alma fell asleep with her red crayon clutched in her hand, Cristian and Felize stood in the doorway watching her breathe. Do you think it'll happen to her? Felize whispered. The jumping. Cristian shook his head. No. I think we paid the price. I think we broke the cycle. But the dreams? Maybe they're just echoes, he said gently. Not curses. Just reminders that love, real love, leaves ripples in every lifetime. Felize leaned into him, her fingers threading with his. She's going to be okay. She'll be more than okay, he said. She's ours. And in the room behind them, Alma dreamed again. Not of war or loss or disappearing timelines, but of gardens in full bloom, of stories being read aloud, and of a man and woman who always found each other. Time had stopped chasing them. And now, it simply watched with quiet reverence as their story continued. Bonus Chapter 2, The Why of It All. Cristian never sought answers. He had accepted long ago that time was broken around him, that he would jump without warning, fall into strange lives and always find her. But now that he'd finally stayed, built a garden, married Felize, held his daughter, he wanted to understand. So one night, beneath a moonlit sky, Cristian returned to the oak tree. The same one Felize once called her wishing tree. The one that had appeared in every version of their story, standing silent through war, childhood, cafe rain and lavender-scented peace. And as he touched the bark, he remembered something he'd never remembered before. He was 16. Back then he was Cristian Suarez, a boy who didn't yet know that time had chosen him. Ordinary, a little lonely, wandering behind his grandmother's house before everything began. Before the dreams. Before the jumps. Before he lost track of who he was. He sat beside her and asked, "Why are you sad?" He sniffled. "Someone I love is going away." "Who?" "I don't know yet. But I will." Cristian didn't understand, but something in him stirred. She looked up at him with big, serious eyes and said, "Promise me something." "What?" "When I forget, will you remember me?" He laughed nervously. "How could I remember someone I don't know?" She placed her tiny hand on his chest. "Because I wished for you." Cristian staggered back from the tree, breath hitched. It hadn't started with him. It started with Felize. Her wish. Her longing. Her soul had whispered through time and time had listened. He had been jumping not because he was cursed, but because he was chosen. He was the answer to a child's wish, the echo of a heart that had loved him in dreams before they had ever met. Felize had called him through time. And time, twisted, mysterious, merciful, had bent to bring them together again and again until they finally got it right. That night he told her everything. She sat in bed beside him, fingers laced in his, eyes wide. "I don't remember it," she whispered. "The woods. The wish. You weren't meant to," he said gently. "But time did." Felize touched his chest where her younger self once had. "So it was me all along." He smiled. "You pulled me through centuries with nothing but a wish and a forget-me-not." They held each other in silence, the truth wrapping around them like a warm blanket. Finally Felize whispered, "Then I think time can rest now. We've found each other." Cristian kissed her softly. "I'm not jumping anymore." And in the corner of the room, the red crayon and the pressed flower sat side by side, quiet reminders of a love that crossed time, only to return home. Bonus Chapter 3, Borrowed Time. The rain tapped gently against the window panes of their bedroom. Felize lay curled on Cristian's chest, her fingers drawing lazy patterns along his collarbone. They had just tucked Alma in, her red crayon still clutched in her hand. Cristian stared at the ceiling for a long moment before he spoke. "Do you ever wonder," he said quietly, "why it was only 3 days?" Felize lifted her head slightly. "When you were unconscious?" He nodded. "In the hospital they said I'd only been gone for 72 hours. But in the jumps..." His eyes darkened with memory. "I lived whole lives, Felize. I was a soldier, a stranger, A man who stayed just long enough to fall in love and then vanish again. She didn't speak, only listened, her gaze soft, waiting. Cristian turned toward her, voice hushed. I think it was never my body that moved. Just my mind. My soul. Felize blinked slowly. So, the Cristian I met each time, you were borrowing yourself? In a way, yes, he murmured. Each version of me was real in that place and time. But the Cristian Suarez I am now, was just passing through. Like time kept borrowing pieces of me. Until I finally came back whole. Felize exhaled. And the 3 days were just how long your body lay resting here. He nodded. Like I went to sleep. And dreamed through centuries. She brushed her thumb across his cheek. You didn't just dream, Cristian. You loved. You waited. You returned. His throat tightened. And now, I'm awake. Really awake. Felize smiled. Then let's never sleepwalk through life again. He kissed her slowly, a promise in every touch. Outside, the rain continued, soft, steady, grounding. Time no longer borrowed him. Because for the first time he had nothing left to chase.